You guys can cheer. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Christovale. I'm one of the curators here at the Hammer Museum. Very excited to have you all here tonight for a refashioned lecture, which I assure you is not like any other lecture you've seen before. This lecture comes out of a slate of programs and an exhibition that's currently on view called Refashioning, CFGNY and Wataru Tominaga. And it's a really wonderful exhibition that originated at the Japan Society in New York and came here and will be open for just another week. I believe Sunday is the closing day. So please go and see it. It's wonderful. Tonight, I will be joined by CFGNY, who is a New York based artist and fashion design collective who works with garments and fabric and sculpture and several mediums to think through the notion of being vaguely Asian, which we'll get into. So I will open it now, and I'd like to introduce CFGNY, Daniel Chu, Tin Nguyen, and Tin Izu. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Chu.
My name's Tin Nguyen.
And I'm Ten Izu.
We're
Together with
CFGNY.
CFGNY.
So we started CFGNY in 2016, and we are a collective based in New York. And it was at first Daniel and I had met, and during that time we were just working in the art world as assistants. We met at a party, we were socializing, but we were also sample sale shopping at the time. And at some of these sample sales, we realized that was sort of like where other queer Asians were congregating. And I think sort of like identity politics in the art world was in a really different place then. And Daniel and I were trying to figure out a way in which we wanted to have a conversation and share this kind of interest, but we wanted to expand that conversation with a community of people. And we realized that fashion could be the medium to sort of do so with.
Oh shoot, I have the clicker. Sorry, I totally spaced out.
And at the time, I think like within the art world, like you could see that if you were sort of a minority or you're not white, you're sort of like tokenized within the art world, which kind of sort of created a type of competition between people. And we could see people who were older than us sort of like competing to be that tokenized spot. And we wanted to do something completely different or opposite in that. And so we thought we would collaborate instead, actually. And yeah, we coined the term vaguely Asian, which Erin had mentioned to describe the project. And I think vaguely Asian comes from sort of our thinking around sort of like being racialized and, like we all come from very different cultural backgrounds. Ten is half Japanese, half Chinese. I am Burmese Chinese, and Tin is Vietnamese. And while we don't come from the sort of same cultural heritage, we all understand what it means to be racialized as Asian, basically, and that this sort of like racialization is this constant process that is not only happening between us, but between everyone else we also interact with and who also perceive us. And yeah, it sort of like sees identity as this more sort of like fluid, sort of indefinable thing that we all have a hand in.
Yeah.
So, although I was not involved in this project at this time, Tin and Daniel also wanted a way to kind of get to know Southeast Asia better, and Tin's mom had taken him, or had brought back custom-made clothing from Vietnam a bunch since he was young, and so they decided to start through this idea of connecting people through garments to start a collective and start producing garments in Vietnam, which are these images that are going across the screen right now.
So actually, how we make collections is we work on this tourist street in Ho Chi Minh City, and it's an industry that popped up in the late '80s, post Vietnam War, and they make clothes really quickly, so they're not factories. They're usually like homes where families live in the buildings, but then the bottom floor is kind of tailoring shop. And yeah, so what they often do is like they can make suits in like 2 days. Expats and Westerners who travel on that street get their favorite like dresses copied. So you see like kind of replicas of designer clothes, Zara, things like that. So there is this sort of, I think with them, why we're interested in working with them is one, I do speak Vietnamese, but they also speak English. So Daniel and Ten are also able to communicate with them. And one thing that was sort of interesting for us, and it helped develop the project in terms of thinking about like us as diaspora, was often when we made clothes with them, because none of us were trained in fashion, they would have to make these sort of detailed decisions. Like we would show up with muslin samples that were sort of very loose, but didn't like yeah, they didn't identify like what a collar looked like or how to make a seam or a hem or a fold. So they would make these decisions that we didn't necessarily perceive, and when we would ask them about it, they would tell us, well, you guys are Westerners, so we made these decisions for you, because we are used to working with people like you.
And we know what you want.
Yeah, so our first collection kind of thought about that, and we thought of the first collection or the practice in general with them as this material conversation where they really contribute a kind of voice within it. Um,
And when we sort of finished making the clothes and the collection and we came back to New York from Vietnam, we thought we should do a fashion show with everything. And at that time, you know, we didn't really have that big of a community around us. And we thought if we can invite a bunch of people to sort of collaborate on making this one day event happen, maybe some type of like connections or some type of community will form out of it. And so we like casted people, like it was friends, but also just friends of friends, but people who we wanted to sort of have this conversation with, who we just sort of encountered online. And we brought a bunch of people together, and we had a lot of fun sort of making this one day event. And some type of community did kind of form out of it. And that was sort of like, yeah, the start of the journey of CFGNY, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that question further, how fashion and garments inform your larger practice. I'm curious to know more about that. Also, you know, how fashion sort of seeps into the various other mediums that you create in this project, CFGNY.
So we, as I think Tin mentioned, or Daniel mentioned earlier, someone mentioned earlier, maybe or maybe not, all of us don't have a background in fashion. We have very different kind of art-related backgrounds. So we approach fashion in kind of the same way that we approach these other mediums as well, such as like sculpture, photography, filmmaking, where it is this ready-made apparatus that has all of these attendant economies and associations and markets tied to it, as well as materials. So the material being garments, like another material being groupings of people or like movement of people, as well as economies involving like trade from different countries and like pathways of production. So we are really inspired by the ways that fashion as a medium can be used to kind of speak about sociality and people, as well as these other kinds of forces.
I think another big part of it was that, like the first time I went to Vietnam, I was painting, and I had such a sort of like difficult time doing so because I just wanted to see the world there and kind of be present with the people. And contemporary art is there is a contemporary art scene in Ho Chi Minh City or in Vietnam in general, but I think the like the more public sort of or like there's a larger audience for fashion or garment making because so many companies are based there. So it was a way for us to just be more kind of thoroughly involved with the community. Like how we had started was that we would just go to the markets and kind of buy fabrics and ask people if they knew sample makers and things like that. And then they would sort of point us in certain directions. And even now there's like a streetwear scene that's really present there that we're friends with. And we really try to include that, like when our friends from New York or LA wherever visit, we always try to kind of get them connected into this more like international conversation that intersects fashion and art. So yeah, I think for us, it's like a way to collapse the kind of creativity, but then also be there and really be able to speak to the people and have them understand to some degree of what we're doing.
And I think something important is that, as I said earlier, we're all artists and we have these different ways of approaching art independently. But as a practice, CFGNY, although we do like fashion, we do photography, installation, painting, all sorts of things. I think the crux of our project is looking at how how people have come together like historically as well as in the present day in like downtown New York City or in Chinatown. So a lot of our practices or a lot of our projects kind of look at how people have how I like identity or like a social kind of identity or social grouping has formed, and fashion is a real way that you can bring people together in this one kind of moment.
Mm.
We also like that it is something that sort of exists in everyone's lives. You know, I think we think a lot about like relational aesthetics, that sort of like 90s art movement. And I think one of the critiques that we have of that is that it was always so contained to an exhibition space. And by sort of producing clothes and having people actually live with them every day, was like a way for us to have sort of like our creative output be something that you live with and is actually so close to your body. It's like literally like touching your body, you know,
Yeah.
and sort of like intervening in that space.
And I think another thing with fashion that we were interested in was, I think, like the aesthetics of it in terms of like the way in which someone may read someone. I think the way in which someone may read you, like visually in terms of your race, like it is a sort of like there's visual cues to that, right? Of how someone's hair might be, or yeah, like what in relation to like the way in which we read like racial cues of one another, it's a similar way in which you can read the aesthetics of garments on someone. And when you wear garments, you know, you can't change your race or like how you sort of are legible in that way, but with garments you're able to there's a kind of playfulness where you can kind of like surpass perceptions.
Or intervene in that type of perception.
Yeah.
She's so iconic.
This is someone who was cast at Trader Joe's.
Yeah. Yeah, so like we often just, I mean, with our models, they're people, we've had done 4 fashion shows now, so it's a lot of the same people walking, they're other artists. And it's been really interesting for us. It always feels like a kind of like reunion when we have a show where everyone re-sees each other and spends the whole day. And it does create this kind of bond or this conversation. The last show, my mom cooked food for 70 people. And then we opened like a cafe in the back of the museum, which was back of house. And like, yeah, I don't know. We do all these little things, I think, outside of our practice in a public sphere that really sort of build upon what we actually do and how we exist.
So, when it comes to this term vaguely Asian, can you explain a bit about how that shows up specifically in this refashioning exhibition?
So as Erin had mentioned earlier, this refashion exhibition actually started at this place called Japan Society in New York. And when we were invited to do the show at Japan Society, we wanted to answer the question, why does Japan Society exist even? It's like this weird organization that exists near the UN that sort of hosts shows and does film screenings and has language classes. And because it's near the UN, people assume that it's like a project of the Japanese government. But actually, after doing a little bit of research about the organization, we were surprised to learn that it was actually an American organization established in 1907 by American businessmen who wanted basically closer ties to the elite of Japan. And it was actually established at the end of the Russian-Japanese War. And that was the first time that a non-white country had beat a white country in a war in like modern times, basically, and sort of announced Japan as this sort of like global player, global political player on like the world stage. And yeah, the Japan Society has like gone through many. Oh, and basically, we thought that it was like a sort of apt metaphor that like actually Japan society, because they were so influential in creating a sort of knowledge around Japaneseness and by extension Asianness for an American audience, they were as interested in this idea of like a vaguely Asian as much as CFGNY was, and sort of reading their history through that concept. And yeah, there's the general outline of like the timeline of Japan society is that pre-war, most of their activities are actually just luncheons and dinners for visiting viscounts, ambassadors, like the Japanese elite, and then actually closed for 10 years during World War II with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And then post-war, it really became the project of John Rockefeller III, who created the Japan Society that we know today, that is sort of like culturally focused, and sort of has that soft power side to it, I would say. And so in the original exhibition, we incorporated sort of like our research into the archive in the video that is also actually also upstairs, that has sort of excerpts from the actual archive of Japan Society that we went through. But then also why the ceramic room is sort of structured in a way to look like a banquet hall was to sort of reference that history that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting about moving the show from Japan Society to the Hammer is that because we had a larger space, there's this room for you all to do more of this looking here in Southern California. And so, can you talk about what you brought to the project here at the Hammer that wasn't at the Japan Society, and specifically what archives and research you were looking at in Southern California?
So, as Daniel was describing what Japan Society was, it was this very elite, very white organization that was targeted towards an elite white audience, specifically in New York and on the East Coast. And the narrative of Japaneseness that that Japan Society was disseminating at the time was of this kind of like timeless, very tidy idea of a very genteel idea of Japan. And we found it very interesting that there was no rupture in Japan Society's archive during World War II, whereas at the same time in California and along the West Coast, there were actually quite a few Japanese people living in the US who had a very different narrative kind of unfolding contemporaneously, whose archives were disrupted tremendously during World War II. A lot of people destroyed their own family archives during this time because there was so much racial paranoia, and people were incarcerated in camps anyway, regardless of their destruction of their own archives. So, for the expansion of the Hammer, we were kind of interested in these differences in narrativizing a people, where Japan Society is this very tidy, encompassing kind of like elite, genteel narrative, and there's this like other very messy narrative unfolding at the same time.
Yeah, we found a quote in Japan Society's archives that had mentioned that Japanese in America on the West Coast, the history of Japanese America on the West Coast was a history of the working class. So when looking at the archives, I mean, internment, a lot of the Japanese that were in the US were like gardening and doing other types of labor. And with this exhibition, because the Japan Society show was so much about it as an organization, it as a sort of a way for these Americans to sort of like expand business. Like, you know, it was to bring in Japanese goods. They wanted to educate people about, you know, the Japanese who were like civil in a way that the rest of Asia wasn't. They would organize these visiting trips, so you could go with them and visit Japan, and then they would also do lectures about Japan and educate people. So then with the with our show at the Hammer, we wanted to trace a more kind of like more tell a story about a kind of personhood and like yeah, more personal story of Japanese American people, actually Japanese American people that lived here, that were, you know, born and raised here several generations.
And also something that I think whenever you speak about like minority people in the U.S. or racialized people, there's often the narrative that is most widely told is like a heroic narrative or an exceptional narrative, such as like because many of the Japanese living on the West Coast were citizens, they were unjustly incarcerated. But these narratives often like like kind of obliterate other reasons why like that's irrelevant, like exceptionalism is kind of a lie. So when we were going through these archives and looking for like these threads that we would turn into this exhibition at the Hammer, we were specifically looking for people who would typically be left out of an archive, such as elderly people, non-citizens, people who could not become citizens for legal reasons, and children. And so this is a bunch of images of archival research that we did at the Japanese American National Museum, which is downtown LA, as well as at UCLA and with their Yuji Ichioka collection.
And if you have seen the exhibition itself, actually, we did the same thing. We had sort of worked in the same vein where we incorporated the research, same vein as Japan Society, where we incorporated the research into one piece, which is, or we had a direct reference to it, which is the sound piece that exists in the middle of the room called Time Stands Still and Seems to Drag, or Time Drags and Seems to Stand Still, sorry, which is what is pictured right here. And within that, it's like a 4-channel sort of sound piece set within this monumental wall lit from inside. And within it, there's sort of like excerpts from the archive, which is like diary entries, but also just like different publications from within Termin, different recollections. It's a lot about like, as like Ten was saying, it's a lot of like banal, sort of like boring things, like these all these narratives that also never get sort of valorized and sort of looked over, basically. Usually coming from people like teenagers or like older women, and like these stories that just don't fit into sort of like a heroic nationalism.
Also, when we were looking in the archive, we came across some images from this photo studio, Toyomi Otake. And Toyomi Otake, I believe this year is the 100-year anniversary of the photo studio itself, which still exists in LA. And during that time in 1942, during internment, Toyomi Otake was incarcerated in Manzanar, and he had snuck a pinhole camera into the camps. And so a lot of the images that you kind of see back during that time in Manzanar are taken by him. And it was illegal at the time. So there were sort of like US government people taking documentation of the camps itself, but he was actually one of it's some of the only images coming from an incarcerated person. And he took a lot of portraits of people there, things like that. And even after the photo studio, or after the internment, he continued to run the photo studio, and he still continues to take portraits of some of the same families that he had shot during that time. So for this exhibition, we decided to collaborate with the photo studio, which is now run by the grandson, Alan Miyatake. And we had brought stuffed animals that we made for this project to the studio to get portraits made of them. So for us, it was sort of this conceptual endeavor of working with, this legendary photo studio that still exists within LA now.
And it really was us trying to engage with the sort of like living history, like Toyomi Otake's studio is sort of living history that still sort of is producing history today, because he continues to document Japanese American family life, and they take these the style of sort of family photography. And the other thing that we did was taking sort of our family of stuffed animals also on a road trip to basically visit sort of important sites of Japanese American history, and taking sort of like snapshot style photographs of like our road trip together. And that is mostly actually what you see in the exhibition is for the Hammer sort of addition to the exhibition.
And oh, I was going to say the stuffed animals is such an interesting choice, almost as stand ins, I think, for a very heavy and loaded history. You speak a lot about the theorist Cyan Nagai, who thinks about cuteness in these very interesting and sort of subversive ways. Can you talk about how that cuteness plays into the creation of stuffed animals in your larger practice?
Yeah. So Sienna Guy is someone we think about a lot, her thinking around cuteness. And she sort of talks about cuteness as this sort of ambivalent force. You know, when you see something that's cute, you want to at once take care of it, but also destroy it at the same time. You know, it has this sort of like weird pull that pulls you in two different directions. And she sort of thinks about cuteness and its sort of development in post-war Japan as sort of Japan's reaction to sort of being emasculated at post World War II, where they weren't allowed to have a standing army, and so they were in some sense very powerless. And they sort of like she thinks about like them developing cuteness as this way in which they could sort of exert this other type of power, where it's like if they weren't able to be strong themselves, they were. They could sort of like coerce power into taking care of them in some way and giving them care.
Yeah. I think we're also interested in cuteness because, as Dana was describing it, as this type of like coercion and even grotesqueness to a cute object of something that is a little perverse, oftentimes racialized, and like queer people are described in terms of having animal-like attributes in order to further dehumanize them. So working with these like very cute yet kind of like deformed stuffed animals is something that we are interested in instead of having to directly represent like a minoritized subject. We kind of find this as a slippage away doing that.
And with this photo series that you guys are seeing, what we had done was we made a series of, I think, 45 stuffed animals, and we drove around LA during a residency with them in the trunk of our car, and we had revisited a handful of Japanese, or a handful of sites that still exist in LA that relate to Japanese American history. So, like right now, you're seeing Terminal Island, which is a port here in LA. And before internment, a Japanese community existed there, but then after internment, that was sort of like bulldozed, and the community never was rehabilitated after that moment. So the stuffed animals, again, are kind of yeah, stand-ins for people or families as this kind of, and we use them in a way that sort of we take them on this kind of historical pilgrimage and revisit these sites that relate to us.
Yeah. Other sites include Santa Anita, Manzanar, and Little Tokyo. Um, Kiyoshi Kurumiya, who's like this prolific HIV activist and anti-war activist grave in Monrovia, and other places I can't remember right now. Angel Island.
Angel Island, yeah.
Yeah.
And another way in which like cuteness shows up is through our fashion. We often use cute motifs in a lot of our clothing prints, but then also we did make a dress and a collection kind of in homage to Comme des Garçons' iconic 90s collection, I think from 97, called Body Meets Form, where she sort of created these tumors. She wanted to work against sort of like the feminization or the sexualization of female bodies, and she created these tumors on these dresses that became these sort of like grotesque protrusions that sort of like stood away from the body. And sort of our way of twisting that concept was to make those tumors out of these cute stuffed animals and sort of like really sort of hone in on this sort of like ambivalence of like cuteness that like it can get very grotesque and gross, but also yeah, be something that you love.
Can you tell me about the materials used in the exhibition, specifically the porcelain and cardboard?
So yeah, cardboard is actually a material that we use a lot. We've used since the beginning of our practice, and I think when we first started using cardboard, it was in relation to traveling to Southeast Asia. Because if you ever travel to Southeast Asia and you're at the airport waiting for your luggage to come in, what you'll see is a lot of cardboard boxes that were checked into checked in as checked-in baggage, and even Filipinos even have like a very specific name for them. It's called a balikbayan box, and it's really sort of like these people's like very efficient, cheap way of transporting commodities from basically the global north to like their homeland, and it could be anything from like toothpaste to like random candy to like underwear. And we also traveled like that actually too when we went to Vietnam because it's cheap and efficient and sort of like maximalizes the space you can take. Literally like the max dimensions you can check into an airplane. And we also like the fact that sort of like the cardboard is a sort of skin to a lot of commodities that travel between like around the world between a lot of different countries, and a lot of our work is sort of about also the way in which like these commodities help define a place and a people and like become racialized in some specific way.
And I think also are interested in cardboard. We like how sort of universal the material is and ubiquitous it is. Like often we travel and we're able to make installation or sculptures with it. And we just passed by the last 4 images, which were architectural details of 3 locations in New York. And those locations we had found in the archives of Japan Society. So what we had done was we had gone to 4 addresses that Japan Society previously occupied, and we made renderings out of cardboard. This here, you're seeing a chair, and it's a chair from the 1920s of the
The Waldorf
the
Hotel.
Waldorf Hotel.
Or the
So
Astoria Hotel.
okay, yeah.
Either of those, I don't remember.
But basically, Japan Society had organized a lot of their banquets during that. So here in this exhibition, you're sort of seeing cardboard utilized as a way to sort of physically form like objects of the past, and are interested in bringing that kind of Gothic architecture into Japan Society as part of the installation was to sort of indicate this idea that Japan Society is an American organization and has, it's equally as American as it is Japanese, because at the current moment it's designed by a Japanese architect. It's like a historical building at the moment, but I think a lot of people forget its past as this American organization. So we wanted to highlight that through the material.
A lot of our work deals with architecture. Obviously, none of us are architects, but a lot of our work is thinking about like the structure of racialization. And so it's like when you'll see if you visit our installation at the Hammer here, that we do a lot of architectural interventions with these materials that look quite ephemeral, such as cardboard, construction plastic, and 2x4s, and like race, like sociality, always under construction, even in these kind of quite concrete looking buildings and concrete ideas too.
And to get back to Angel's question about porcelain, we had done a project at the RISD Museum with this organization, Triple Canopy. It was one of our first institutional projects, and we were brought in to specifically do research around this part of the museum called the Pendleton House, which is the first American wing in the United States. And within this wing, there's Chinese porcelain and Chinese furniture, and this collection was also formed around the same time, turn of the 20th century, and the curators wanted to bring us in, sort of in thinking about this idea of a vaguely Asian, because it was American wing, and the idea that these Chinese objects existed within this collection for the past 100 years, but weren't completely acknowledged as so. So I think with us, it was like seeing that the way in which America sort of formulates its self-identity, it's always been in relation to another, and specifically China.
This idea of like a faraway country that has a lot of like amazing commodities such as porcelain has always been kind of an impetus for American identity. Even today, obviously, with people's obsession with China. So the way that we form these is we abut a bunch of kind of like disparate objects together, and then with plaster cast the negative space between all of these objects. So, and then make a mold of that and cast it in porcelain again. So these porcelain sculptures are actually kind of the like ghostly imprints of all these objects that formed the space between the objects originally, but none of the objects remain. And you can kind of identify some of the objects that formed the initial cast, but a lot of them become so broken and jagged through the casting process that it becomes unrecognizable.
Yeah, and we sort of like think about these porcelain works in relation to an identity. because the way in which they're formed is that they're touched by a series of objects, like in the way in which people's identities are sort of formulated by the way in which you respond to people.
It's like a skin. It's like a skin that's imperfect and kind of torn.
Oh, she's sweet but a psycho, a little bit psycho. At night she's screaming, I'm on my mind. Oh, she's hot but a psycho, so left but she's right though. At night she's screaming, I'm on my mind. She'll make you curse, but she a blessing. She'll rip your shirt within a second. You'll be coming back for seconds with your play. You just can't help it. You'll play along, let her lead you on. You'll be saying no, then saying yes, cause you're messing with your head. Oh, she's sweet but a psycho, a little bit psycho. At night she's screaming, oh my mind. Oh, she's hot but a psycho, so like but she's right though. At night she's screaming, oh my mind. 為背卡更太大佢 lazy， 是開陣白睇實體，要 people say 亂講話佢會，可是會把個 cycle， a little big cycle， at night screaming oh my， 時生往死，當正去 poisons， he kiss your neck with no emotions， 共是生命 if no if love is， 是太濕水，當數個 calling no。You play along, Lily you on. You be saying no, then saying it's yeah, cause it's messing with your head. Oh, she's we back a cycle, a little big cycle. At night squealing me on my mind. Oh, she's hard back a cycle, so like back she's right though. At night squealing me on my mind. We both car gang tie back for ladies, it's poison back hey the tea. If people say long don't walk away, cause we back a cycle, a little big cycle. At night squealing me on my mind. 時生往死，當正去 poisons， he kiss your neck with no emotions， 共是生命 if no if love is， 是太濕水，當數個 calling no， you play along, Lily you on, you be saying no, then saying it's yeah, cause it's messing with your head.She's we back a cycle, a little big cycle. At night squealing me on my mind. Oh, she's hard back a cycle, so like back she's right though. At night squealing me on my mind. We both car gang tie back for ladies, it's poison back hey the tea. If people say long don't walk away, cause we back a cycle, a little big cycle. At night squealing me on my mind.時生往死，當正去 poisons， he kiss your neck with no emotions， 共是生命 if no if love is， 是太濕水，當數個 calling no， you play along, Lily you on, you be saying no, then saying it's yeah, cause it's messing with your head.Oh, she's we back a cycle, a little big cycle. At night squealing me on my mind. Oh, she's hard back a cycle, so like back she's right though. At night squealing me on my mind. We both car gang tie back for ladies, it's poison back hey the tea. If people say long don't walk away, cause we back a cycle, a little big cycle. Anh nói squealing mình ở ma mai mai. You just like me, you out your mind. I know strength, we both still pretty kind. You telling me, แต่อ่างวิ่งแสงไว้ก็คุยแทงแต่อยู่ตรงเลือดเธอแพงโอ้ซีสวยบ้าสายเขาลีกเขาบิ๊กสายเขาแอกไนท์สกุยลิงไม่ออกมาไม่โอ้ซีสฮาบ้าสายเขาโซเล็กบ้าซีสลวยโตแอกไนท์สกุยลิงไม่ออกมาไม่เวเบอร์คากลางถ่ายตาคนเลดี้ซิสพอยจนปากเทสักทีอีพี่เผาเซลวงต้องว่าเธอเวยเธอซีอุ้ยบ้าสายเขาลีกเขาบิ๊กสายเขาแอกไนท์สกุยลิงไม่ออกมาไม่
What do we do? I think Angel's good, right?
So I have one last question. Um, just thinking about collectivity and how you all work together, how does that elevate the practice and the project that is CFGNY?
Sorry, a little out of breath. I would say that so as artists working, in the art world, you eventually realize that nothing is ever done by yourself. There's this myth that artists are these singular geniuses producing works that reflect their own kind of like their own exceptionalism. As we talked about in this lecture, there's no such thing as really exceptionalism. So we've all worked for other people, for other artists, and I think collectivity has been a big part of how we understand like amazing things to be made with multiple people's voices, and it also allows for spaces of unknowing, and that's what's really important about polyvocality.
And I think also it like really sort of like dovetails with our interest in like the vaguely Asian, or like this idea of like racial, like sort of working with like what it means to be racialized, or like working within that space. And like, yeah, as I said before, that also like race is also a thing that is like socially sort of like defined by us. Um, uh, us and not us at the same time. But it is something that isn't coming from one person, but is really sort of like together we define it. And yeah, also like I think it also working collectively is the way in which we show our politics through our work. While we might not be speaking about like politics so directly, I think we're living our politics. This more sort of like cooperative world that we envision.
Yeah, and I mean, I think working collectively it's been really nice because you literally have to spend time with one another. And I think through that time, it's just like you're able to have so many conversations about, of course, your art practice and what you're making, but then just, I think, politics of life in general. And we sort of help guide each other through the art world, but also, yeah, through everything in some way. So I think a lot of other artists and artist friends of ours are always gravitating towards us because we are a group and we're always kind of like working and thinking together, and we share that space with other people where we think and work together collectively, sort of outside of CFGNY as well.
Thank you. We'd love to open it up to Q&A just for a few questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will come and give you a mic.
Hey, thanks for coming and talking with us today and sharing. I'm wondering how you interpret the commercial side of fashion. Like, to what degree is running a business important to you, or how do you play with that?
We actually kind of don't. I think we've, yeah, like we work with a publicist and like a stylist who's very deep in fashion. So when we have fashion presentations, we're able to get the support from and the visibility in that world. But actually, we don't sell retail, and we only distribute direct to consumer, and we only distribute sort of on our own terms at our own pace. So our clothes are kind of hard to buy, and we do it when we do exhibitions. So like the Hammer sold some things of ours, and when we're in LA, we'll kind of bring things around. But we mainly rely on sort of institutional support and a little bit of the commercial art world.
We also use these moments of sales to kind of like fund the rest of our art practice too. So it's like when we sell garments, it's not just like selling garments. It's just goes back into the studio and helps us produce more work. And I think we like selling clothes on the rare occasion that we do, because it's a way that other people can kind of like take a part of our practice home without it being like a very expensive sculpture or other type of like fine art. Because we like being around people.
Any other questions?
I know this sounds a little off, but I saw the exhibit twice, and the fabrication on some of the garments had this paper that looked like it was pulled apart, which I didn't see in the fashion show this time. Was there a thought process behind that?
That's actually the other artist's gallery. So that would have been his work.
Yeah, we didn't actually showcase that much fashion in this exhibition. I think we use moments like this, like a public program, to activate the space with the garments. But actually, in the exhibition itself, it's mostly sculpture, video, sound, installation.
Or there are a few of our garments in the sort of banquet room, and we installed them in the banquet room as if sort of like someone who was wearing CFGNY was at this banquet and had put their jacket down. So it was on the back of this cardboard chair that we had made, or it was draped over a table. And it really sort of like, yeah, I think it speaks more to the way in which we're engaging with clothing as a sort of like relational, social thing.
Yeah, like we prefer to see the clothes like on other people and sort of out in the world as a way to activate a kind of conversation around our practice.
One last question.
Hi, I've witnessed a number of artist collectives, and among the many that I've seen, at least in this presentation, you guys seem to be very much on the same wavelength in how you transition from one thought to the next with each other. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe that's your presentation, but I'm curious. I've come out of kind of a conflict resolution background that I studied for a number of years, how you all resolve conflicts within your community within your collective in terms of like direction or about theme or any other conflicts that might come up. And I'm especially asking because I come out of film as well, which tends to be very hierarchical. So I'm trying to get some ideas on how your collective works and how I might bring that into my own practice.
I think one thing we're always trying to keep in mind is to de-hierarchize decision making, because as we kind of touched on earlier, the art world, like, well, many cultural production types of worlds run on these kinds of hierarchy and ideas of like intellectual authorship. So a lot of the conflicts we just talk it talk it out kind of intensely, and we sit on it, and then yeah, we decide together.
I also think we all engage in the project understanding that you're not ever always going to get your way, and that like also like the vision of CFGNY is going to be different from your vision actually, and we all trust each other enough, I think, to sort of like allow that to happen when it feels like it needs to. We definitely get into arguments for sure, and there's conflict, but yes, as Ten says, like we just have sometimes very intense conversations, but yeah, I think you just have to go into it with the right mindset also, for it to work.
I think the other thing that's really helpful is I do think that, like, in terms of our long term vision, I think we're all kind of overlapped pretty well in terms of that. So, even in the moment, if you have a disagreement, I think you kind of see the end road of it or the largest picture of it. And often, what we do, and if we're not in an understanding with one another, we sort of like make presentations to one another. So if there's an idea, we'll say everyone come up with 3, and then between the 3 of us, we'll present 9 ideas, and then we'll kind of narrow that down. And because we've worked together for so long, it becomes really clear of what decision we should make when you kind of see it laid out in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that it is also this language that we have developed with each other. And to find this type of like collaborative language is actually just, I think, also one of the hardest steps in collaborating is being able to find people who can sort of like speak or that you can develop this collaborative language with. And that doesn't always happen with people. And so, yeah, it's a combination of like mindset, but also like finding the right wavelength that you can tap into.
And
I would also say that collaborating the way that we do is more than just like collaborating ideas. It's like you have to really get to know how people express their ideas, as well as like, I don't know, like some way that like Tin or Daniel will express an idea will be vastly different than this way that I would express it. So you kind of have to learn each other's language in that way as well.
yeah, I think often like I'll know what the other people will answer, what their decision would be, and I'll adjust mine ahead of time in relation to that. And I would say that like this kind of seamlessness that you're seeing on stage right now isn't necessary just for the performance. Like even coming to LA and driving a car, like we all are on insurance and we all take turns driving. If we go to restaurants, like it's collaborative. We're like, okay, you pick a salad, you pick this. And when people join us, they're like, wow, okay, this is how you guys were like. But yeah, it's real.
What is CFGNY? Is that the question?
That's a good question. Which letter are you?
I don't know.
No, it's an open-ended acronym actually. So the kind of the name of it changes. It's our original and sort of main name is Concept Foreign Garments New York, but we also have a bootleg name which is Cute Fucking Gay New York, and then we have all these sort of like acronyms in between. So that changes depending on the project itself.
One last question, right there.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm one of the student educators here, so I do tours of the gallery a lot, and I feel like two of the main emotions that I get when talking about your work with visitors is, or like the initial emotion is like wonder and also confusion, and I feel like that confusion kind of enables them to learn more about these histories of all these researches that you guys have done. And I was wondering like what you see as the role of the viewer when you're making work, or if that's or if that's a consideration at all, and how you might think confusion plays into that.
I think confusion is something that people frequently express when they encounter our work, whether it's like like a fashion presentation or sculpture or other things, because we do so many things because there are actually four of us and all of us come from different backgrounds of making things or of thinking about things. So I think that confusion is some place that we find most fertile in where ideas can come from, because what we really are not interested in is a thread of like authenticity, or absolute truth of an experience or like an identity or anything kind of like that.
Yeah, I think that kind of confusion just like it's a confusion we have too. Like it's our curiosity, so I don't know. Yeah, we like. I feel like it helps us move forward. You know, I often don't understand things that we're doing, and I'm thinking about them all the time.
And how would the thing about viewer? I don't know. I'm still trying to formulate my answer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still trying to formulate my answer about like thinking about a viewer.
I don't know. I think that I trust that because even though we have formed this kind of weird like hive mind between us, I do think that because I think about this a lot. The four of us are actually so different than each other. I am not so worried about viewership when we make a work because there are actually so many different perspectives coming together to create a work. And if we can all find something that is compelling about the project that we're working on, I think that it will resonate with someone. And maybe if it doesn't, it's just not the right work for them.
And that's a perfect way to end.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Tuesday night.
Thank you. I also just want to thank the incredible team of models and stylists and makeup artists and everyone who put this together behind the scenes. So thank you. Thank you always to our public programs who makes incredible things like this happen. And we're going to have light refreshments outside and a really incredible drink crafted just for tonight by Angela DiMagaya, an incredible chef based here in LA. So thank you.
Thank you.